We'll get started. And this is, by the way, everyone, I might have mentioned at the beginning, this talk that Amy is giving is it's a new talk for her, and she asked if she could do it here. It's a complete, she's doing this in North Carolina, I believe, next week, and it is fantastic. And she talks with the best of the best, and she's invited to all these conferences, and again, I'm really honored to have her here.
So we're guinea pigs.
You're guinea pigs, and yeah, this is an honor, you know, sort of like the, what do you call it, anyway, the first of its kind. Okay, there you go, Amy, I'm finished.
Oh, thank you, yes, this is the world premiere of the talk.
That's the world premiere, yay, that's it. Okay.
You guys get to be the first ever to see this, and thank you for sticking around. If we didn't really have time to eat, if you get hungry, just power through, like Megan said. It's a fantastic opportunity. What are we talking about today? Hyperinsulinemia. What does that mean? Hyper, high, insulinemia in the blood. Too much insulin in the blood. All right. When it comes to metabolic disease and metabolic illness, what comes to mind immediately? Obesity and type 2, right? They kind of go hand in hand. They even call it diabesity, even though, to be sure, not everybody with type 2 diabetes is obese, right? Plenty of normal weight people with diabetes. Anyway, here's our happy little cruise ship. Whew, thank goodness. More than enough room between these two gigantic icebergs that we can just sail through, no problem, totally metabolically safe. Onward, full steam ahead. Oh no! What is this? We just came through the icebergs. I thought it was going to be smooth sailing. Now we have to navigate all these little things. What's this? Well, we sailed through type 2 diabetes and obesity way in the distance, right? We're in the clear now, but now we've got to navigate all this other stuff. Hypertension, cardiovascular disease, gout, erectile dysfunction, BPH, benign prostate hypertrophy, that's the enlarged prostate gland. Women, you don't get out scot-free. We have PCOS, skin tags, migraines. Now, we got some other little smaller icebergs in the back there. We got Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, cancer, slightly less research on some of those than some of these others. But these big, bold, red things in the front, what all of these have in common is chronically high insulin, with or without normal blood sugar. I will be saying that over and over and over again throughout this talk because it's the most important thing you're going to hear. All of these conditions that you probably have never heard are connected to insulin, are connected to chronically high insulin even when your blood glucose is normal. This is why, because all those conditions have a fundamental either primary cause of hyperinsulinemia or chronically high insulin makes them worse, whatever the actual cause is, chronically high insulin makes them worse. This has led, some of you may be familiar with some of these names, Grant Schofield and Karen Zinn and Catherine Croft out of New Zealand. They call hyperinsulinemia a unifying theory of chronic disease. This other paper, one of my all-time favorite papers on hyperinsulinemia, this one is written by Lauren Cordain, the big paleo diet authority, and Drs. Mike and Mary Dan Eads, famous low-carb doctors, author of the book Protein Power. They wrote a paper called Hyperinsulinemic Diseases of Civilization, More Than Just Syndrome X. Syndrome X is the old original name for what we now know as metabolic syndrome. So they are saying hyperinsulinemic diseases are more than just the stuff we associate with metabolic syndrome, which is what? Obesity, type 2 diabetes, maybe hypertension, some of that other stuff. There's a lot more going on. Now, why would insulin be related to all that stuff? Insulin's a blood sugar thing, right? What is insulin? Is it a vitamin? Is it a mineral? What is it? It's a hormone. Thank you. Smart audience. So, can you name some other hormones? What are some other hormones? Testosterone, estrogen, cortisol, yeah.
mTOR.
Let's take estrogen because it's a really good example. Why is it? I mean, estrogen we mostly know as a female reproductive hormone, right? We men produce very small amounts of estrogen too. Mostly it's a female reproductive type hormone. So that's what estrogen is, female reproductive menstrual cycle kind of hormone. Why is it that in menopause and after menopause, When estrogen levels tank in a woman, her risk for cardiovascular disease jacks up. Weight gain tends to jack up. Osteoporosis, loss of bone mineral jacks up. Why? Estrogen's a menstrual cycle hormone. Well, the answer is estrogen is not a menstrual cycle hormone. I don't know of any hormone that only has one job. Pretty much every hormone you can think of affects multiple tissues, multiple systems, so insulin is no different. The reason that insulin may affect all of those iceberg conditions is because insulin is much, much more than a blood sugar hormone. Regulating blood sugar is one of the least important, least impressive things insulin does. Insulin affects just about every possible organ, gland, tissue, cell you can think of. I talked about Alzheimer's yesterday. We know it affects the brain. We're going to talk in detail about hypertension and gout, but again, reproductive system, the eyes, the inner ears, there's almost nothing you can think of that is not affected by insulin. So if insulin is not really a blood sugar hormone, what does insulin do? What the heck is insulin? I'm going to steal this from a lady named Diane Sanfilippo, who some of you may know. She's a very well-known paleo kind of expert. She said insulin is like your mom. Insulin wants to tidy up. When your room is messy, you've got junk all over the place, insulin wants to come along and put stuff away. Insulin does not like having stuff hanging out in the bloodstream. It wants to put stuff into cells. So if your mom wants you to put all your crap into the closet, under the bed, on the shelf, just get it off the floor. Insulin wants to do that to the bloodstream, get stuff out of the bloodstream. So one of the things insulin gets out of the bloodstream is glucose. We know this. I mean, insulin is a blood sugar hormone, but that's only one of its many, many roles. So insulin does facilitate glucose uptake. We know it does. But do you know that the vast majority of insulin uptake in the body, of glucose uptake, is not insulin dependent? There's many, many different kinds of glucose transporters on various cell types. Most of them do not require insulin to suck up glucose. Some of them do, most of them don't. If you had no insulin whatsoever, glucose could get into most of your cells just fine. Even if you're a type 1 diabetic. We don't have time to get into that. I'm planning a gigantic blog post about that some other time. The point is, yes, insulin helps glucose get into cells, but that's not its only job, and most cells don't even need insulin to take glucose up. Something else insulin likes to get out of the bloodstream and into cells is amino acids from protein. This is why bodybuilders, believe it or not, some of them actually inject insulin. Can you imagine being a healthy, fit person injecting insulin for fun? Because they want to get swole. Because insulin makes you swole. Insulin makes muscle cells grow. But again, and this is also why a lot of bodybuilders and athletes think they need post-workout carbohydrates, right? In addition to a protein shake, they'll have some source of carb because the insulin spike will help get the amino acids into the muscle. And that is true, but as we all know, protein itself affects insulin. So you can get amino acids into the cells just fine, just from protein without the carb. Don't get scared of protein, we're going to talk about it more later. But the point is, you can get amino acids into the cells because of insulin. Insulin promotes tissue growth. It's kind of an anabolic hormone. We all know this only too well. I said yesterday, one of the doctors said exercise was like miracle, or BDNF was like miracle growth for your neurons. Another doctor said insulin is like miracle growth for your fat cells, right? Most of us in this room know this only too well. Insulin really helps fat tissue grow. What else does it help grow? I just said it helps the muscles grow. Insulin also kind of facilitates weird, random, aberrant, unchecked growth, right? I have skin tags on that iceberg slide. Prostate gland enlargement, cysts in the ovaries, just growth of stuff, growth of tissues. I mean, cancer is the prime example of this, right? Cancer is the prime example of uncontrolled growth. And I'm not saying that insulin causes cancer, but insulin facilitates cancer growth and expansion once it's already in the body. Insulin rolls out the red marker for cancer. What's I saying? World premiere of this talk, give me a second. They've done a lot of research with cancer patients where chronic hyperinsulinemia leads to worse outcomes. So either increased mortality from the cancer or increased risk of recurrence. Let's say you go through chemoradiation, what have you, you're cancer-free, your risk of it coming back is higher if you're chronically hyperinsulinemic. So insulin is a growth promoter. This, to me, personally, for what I care about, is the most important, most astonishing function of insulin. Insulin inhibits lipolysis. Lipolysis is a big fancy word for breaking down fat. Lipo means fat, and like liposuction. Lysis is breaking apart. Insulin puts the brakes on breaking apart fat, and if you want to burn fat, you have to break it apart first, so its little fatty acids and bits and pieces can be burned. So, insulin inhibits fat burning. Whose jobs, you didn't know that? This is a blood sugar hormone. Why does it stop you from burning fat? If you want to lose weight and you are chronically awash in insulin, it ain't gonna happen, right? This is why it was so, well, let's move on first, but this is part of why so many of us had or still have such a difficult time losing weight, losing body fat, when we're eating all those recommended grains and starches. All that high fiber cereal, all the skim milk, the low fat bran muffin, the granola bar, the pretzels, the rice cakes. We're awash in insulin. It puts the brakes on fat burning. So think of insulin like a security guard that stands outside your fat cell. As long as insulin is there, that fat is not getting out, no way, no how. You can think of it almost also like a security guard outside a bank vault. That security guard is to make sure that that money doesn't come out of that vault, right? That money ain't going nowhere. So let's take a look at this in action in terms of fat burning and weight loss, and then we're going to move on to some other effects of insulin. So I am the worst artist on the planet. If you read my blog, you know I'm a writer. There's a reason I'm a writer and not an artist. This is not to scale. There's no unit here, but this is just for example and visual purposes. Anytime you see stuff above in the red, insulin is elevated, you're in fat storage mode, lipolysis is inhibited, you're in fat storing mode, not fat burning mode. Down below in the green, insulin is lower, fat's being mobilized, it's being sent out of the fat tissue to be burned in other cells. So, again, total general example because I'm a terrible artist. This is an example of somebody who is relatively insulin sensitive, eating 3 meals a day. They wake up, you're overnight, insulin's kind of low, but you wake up, you have breakfast. Normal type diet, maybe you have a bagel with cream cheese and jam and a glass of orange juice. Insulin shoots up, but couple of hours, after the meal, it's coming back down, no problem. So that in between breakfast and lunch, you do spend a little bit of time in that green lower insulin fat burning state. Then you have lunch, maybe you have a sandwich, whatever, again, insulin comes up, goes back down again, so that between lunch and dinner, back in the fat burning zone, you have a big dinner, insulin spikes again, but again, overnight, you're in the fasted mode, insulin's back down to normal. Not too bad. You want to balance time you spend with higher insulin with time you spend with lower insulin. So here's another example of somebody eating 2 meals a day. Again, someone relatively insulin sensitive. Overnight fast, big fat burning mode, have a video. Kind of a large insulin spike, because if you're only eating 2 meals a day, they're probably going to be large meals. Nice big insulin hit, but again, relatively insulin sensitive, comes back down, and because you're only eating 2 meals, you spend an even longer period of time between the 2 meals down in the low insulin fat burning state. Second meal, big insulin hit again, no problem, insulin comes back down a couple of hours later, back to fat burning mode, no problem. Now, here is an example of somebody who may be insulin resistant that's doing what they think they're supposed to do. They're having 3 meals a day and snacks, because we all know you gotta snack, you gotta keep that metabolism revved up, you gotta keep that blood sugar up, right? Doing what we're supposed to do, again, someone's having a muffin, a bowl of cereal, skim milk juice, insulin sky high. Insulin doesn't even have time to come back to normal before having a snack. Then maybe, that's your 10 a.m. muffin. Maybe you have like toast and something but that's the snack, your 10 a.m. muffin. Maybe if you're lucky, you spend a tiny bit of time in the fat burning zone before lunch. Have lunch, maybe you're going out with coworkers, you're having pasta, you're having breadsticks, awash in insulin again, having the 3 p.m. snack, there's your cookies from the office vending machine, Insulin never has a chance to even come back to normal before you're jacking it up again. This is an absolute disaster. This was me 10 years ago. This is probably some of us in this room right now, or was us 2 months ago, 6 months ago, maybe yesterday. Maybe you're brand new to this. Welcome. But this is a metabolic disaster. This person is swimming in insulin all day long. They're never really in the fat-burning mode. So if we want to liberate that fat from the fat cells, what do we have to do? We got to get rid of insulin. We got to move the security guard away so the fat can come out, so that money can be liberated from the vault, right? How are we going to do this? How are we going to get insulin out of the way? Let's have an example of, for example, somebody on a low-carb diet or on a ketogenic diet. This person happens to be eating 3 meals. So overnight, your insulin's kind of low. You have breakfast. Maybe you have bacon and eggs or sausage or even like high-fat, full-fat Greek yogurt and some nuts. So insulin goes up just a little bit. You know, even when you eat a keto meal, insulin still goes up, but just a very little amount, the way it's supposed to. So you're still in a huge fat mobilizing mode. You have lunch, maybe it's a bigger meal than your breakfast, slightly bigger insulin rise, but still, compared to the high-carb meals, a very low rise. Dinner, again, another bump. You spend the vast majority of the day in the low insulin, fat-burning state. And most people, you know, some people wouldn't even need 3 meals a day. And I mean, most people don't even need to snack, right? You can snack on a low-carb diet, but most people don't need to. The fact is, when you're on a low-carb diet and your insulin is low almost all the time, you don't need to snack because you're eating all the time. When your insulin is low, you're eating your body fat. That's what I'm eating right now. I mean, you know, I got a bagel right here. That's what body fat is for. It's stored energy. It's stored fuel to be used when you're not consuming fuel. Right? That's what Dr. Funk said. It's not there for looks. It's there to be used in times when we're not actually eating. So you can see why the low-carb diet is so helpful for keeping insulin lower. And I don't have a slide here on fasting, but if I did, if you were fasting, you would have the entire time would be the green, right? You wouldn't ever really be having higher insulin. Not even a little bit from the carb. I mean, naturally, normal little rises are going to happen probably even when you're fasting, but you're going to have even more time in the fat-burning state. And I mean, one of the low-carb physicians I know asks his patients when they're coming back for follow-ups, how's your hunger? He doesn't say, have you been cheating? Have you been eating carbs? He says, how's your hunger? Because he knows if they say, well, doc, I'm hungry all the time, they're eating carbs. That's the giveaway, right? We don't know. When you're fat adapted, you know, it takes some time when you're new to this, but when you're fat adapted, you're not hungry all the time. You do get hungry eventually, like Megan was saying. You can't fast forever all the time. At some point, you have to put food and energy into your body. But when you get hungry, when you're fat adapted, when you're keto adapted, it's like a nice sort of comfortable physical hunger. It's not that ravenous, I'm going to kill somebody if I don't eat in 2 seconds. You know, I'm going to eat my own arm if I don't get fed. Like it doesn't happen. Once in a while it happens, I'm not going to lie, like every now and then, once in a while I still feel that, but it's rare. So it's easy to eat only a few times a day on a low-carb diet. So we said syndrome X, right? And I said that syndrome X is what we now call metabolic syndrome. Metabolic syndrome used to be called insulin resistance syndrome, and I wish it still was. In fact, insulin resistance syndrome is a little messy because even now among the experts, no one really knows what insulin resistance is. There's a lot of debate as to how to define it, what it is, and certainly a load of debate as to what causes it. So since we're not even sure, I wish they would call it chronically high insulin syndrome. They could call it CHRIS, right? Chronically high insulin syndrome. Anyway, the point is, the metabolic syndrome, what we now call the metabolic syndrome or the insulin resistance syndrome. So let's keep that in mind. When you hear metabolic syndrome, syndrome X, think insulin resistance. And this is from the Journal of Hypertension. That might be hard to see, the Journal of Hypertension. What is an article about the metabolic syndrome, the insulin resistance syndrome, doing in a blood pressure journal? This is a blood sugar hormone, right? What does insulin have to do with blood pressure? Well, how do they diagnose metabolic syndrome? Insulin resistance syndrome. There's five criteria If you have 3, or you don't have to have all 5, if you have 3 or more or are taking medication for them, you can be diagnosed with metabolic syndrome. I'm sorry, I do have this in the US unit, so whatever these are in centimeters, I have no idea. Large waist circumference, high triglycerides, low HDL, hypertension, elevated blood pressure, and elevated fasting glucose. Do you see total cholesterol on this slide anywhere? Total cholesterol. Absent, right? LDL. Who sees LDL anywhere on this slide? Nowhere. Because nobody cares. No, I'm just kidding. Your total cholesterol and your LDL really tell you very, very little to nothing about your risk for metabolic syndrome or insulin-resistant syndrome. But this is the official diagnostic criteria. You can see from the source, this is from the US Mayo Clinic. It's like one of the most prestigious medical organizations in the country. This is the official diagnostic criteria for insulin-resistant syndrome. What's missing? What? Did I just say this is insulin-resistant syndrome? And a measurement of your actual insulin is not even part of the official diagnostic criteria. What are we doing? Everybody's so concerned with glucose, everybody's so concerned with blood sugar that we are missing the 800-pound gorilla in the room, that is insulin. So, some of you people in the audience, if you have been doing research or following stuff on social media for a couple of years, you might have heard of Dr. Joseph Kraft. I think Dr. Bishop mentioned his work briefly yesterday. We have Dr. Kraft to thank for most of the icebergs on that cardiovascular disease, gout, hypertension, PCOS. We have Dr. Kraft to thank for that. Dr. Kraft is the one who did some research in the 80s and 90s that uncovered a staggering scope of chronically high insulin, even when blood sugar was normal. All of these gazillions of people that have all sorts of metabolic problems and health problems with normal blood sugar, and no one ever knew because no one was ever testing insulin. They were only ever testing the sugar. He wrote a book called Diabetes Epidemic in You. Highly recommended. It's only about this big. It's a really easy read. These quotes are from his book. The pathology of diabetes occurs in those with normal blood sugars. There are far too many who are told, don't worry, your fasting blood sugars are normal. Remember, I shared that story yesterday, my friend told me. Normal fasting sugar, normal A1C, but he's obese, has a hell of a hard time losing weight. His fasting insulin was 32. That's through the roof. Again, from Dr. Kraft, having a normal weight, normal BMI, normal fasting blood sugar, even normal fasting insulin does not exclude hyperinsulinemia type 2 diabetes. Dr. Kraft actually called hyperinsulinemia type 2 diabetes. He said they were the same thing. He puts a slash because it's the same disease. Dr. Kraft coined the term diabetes in situ, or occult diabetes. Occult means hidden. The diabetes, the high glucose, is hidden by the high insulin. Remember I said yesterday, we've got all these people with normal fasting glucose and normal A1C. They're only normal because the sky-high insulin is keeping those in check. No one's ever measuring insulin. You guys might recognize those gentlemen in that picture. That's Dr. Kraft there on the left. He passed away, I think, last year. He was in his 90s. But that's Dr. Jeff Berger, very well-known low-carb doctor out of Denver, and that's Ivor Cummins, the fat emperor who has brought Dr. Kraft's work back to the forefront. I never even heard of Dr. Kraft until Ivor started writing about him. So the fact that like so many people have this high insulin, even when the blood sugar is normal, is why so many people can't lose weight when they're doing a low-fat diet and lots of exercise, and why people still are hypertensive when they're eating a low-sodium diet, and why people have unexplained migraines, skin tags, joint pain, all this stuff. When their blood looks good. The blood looks good because we're not measuring the one thing we should be measuring in the blood. So since the fasting glucose is so misleading, and it really doesn't tell us much of anything, are there better ways to assess metabolic health? Well, you bet there are. One of them is called HOMA-IR. Dr. Bishop mentioned this briefly yesterday. It stands for Homeostatic Model Assessment of Insulin Resistance. Homeostasis meaning like balance. How hard is your body working to keep you at balance? So the HOMA-IR basically is a measure of how hard is your body working to keep your blood sugar normal at a normal rate. How much insulin do you have to pump out to maintain that homeostasis? And there's really no official accepted numbers, but these are the numbers some of the low-carb docs I know go by. You generally want to be on the low side for excellent insulin sensitivity. So let's look at two examples of HOMA-IR in action. Person A has a fasting glucose of 5.3. Person B has a fasting glucose of 4.6. Based on the glucose alone, person B is looking like our winner here. Person B is like, yeah, if you had to choose between these two people, you want to be person B. Even though, I mean, to be clear, 5.3 or 96 is not high. That would be fine in my book. But if you go by some of the slightly crazier, slightly more strict, low-carb, keto people out there, but 96 is too high, you want to be in the 70s, you want to be in the 80s. Not really true. There's a lot of variation with the fasting glucose. However, knowing nothing else about these two people, you probably want to be person B. But person A's fasting insulin is only 4 micro-international units. Person B is at 18. Whoa, what? Person B requires over quadruple the amount of insulin to keep their blood sugar a little bit lower. So person A has a much, much lower HOMA-IR, even though their blood sugar is higher. Person B is clearly severely insulin resistant. Now, if you have to choose between these people, I want to be person A. I would much sooner choose to be a person with slightly higher blood sugar but much, much lower insulin. And I'm not talking higher blood sugar like, again, I can't really do the conversion in my head, but in America, like, if my fasting blood sugar was 150, yeah, I'd be worried. But 90-something with a fasting insulin of 4, nah, So, in my opinion, fasting insulin is the most important test that most doctors don't order. If we started testing fasting insulin, we could discover so many more of these metabolic problems, either before they become problems or understand the root cause and do something about it immediately, before it turns into Alzheimer's 30 years later, before it becomes type 2 diabetes, before you have gout attacks 4 times a month. Identifying that high insulin early is so important to me. However, there are limitations with the fasting insulin test. Just like a fasting blood glucose, in many people, the fasting insulin will be normal, but once they eat, especially if they eat a high-carb meal, the insulin goes sky high and it kind of stays elevated throughout the day. It doesn't really ever come back to normal. So there are limitations with the fasting insulin. So I like the fasting insulin because if it's high, you know for sure there's a problem. You don't have to do any further testing. If it's not high, then you have to dig a little bit deeper. If the fasting insulin is not high, you probably have a lot of indirect indicators that you do have chronically high insulin throughout most of the day, even though your fasting level is normal. That would be some of the stuff on the metabolic syndrome criteria slide, like large waist circumference, elevated blood pressure, low HDL, high trigs. So there's other ways to assess, but if you really, really want to know, there is something called the Kraft test. I'm going to blow through these slides kind of quick. Don't even worry about the numbers, just look at the chart here. The purple is glucose, the blue is insulin. This is so the Kraft test is an oral glucose tolerance test, except instead of only testing glucose like they normally do, Dr. Kraft tested insulin at each one of those points as well. And instead of a 2-hour test, a standard OGTT is 2 hours. He made it a 5-hour test. And by doing this is how Dr. Kraft uncovered this huge, huge metabolic, you-know-what, storm that was going on. So this is a very metabolically healthy person. They eat something, fasting levels and everything are normal. Insulin peaks at 30 minutes, comes down nice and quick. Blood sugar, doesn't really get too high, comes down back nice and quick, so that by 3 or 4 hours, you're back to normal. So if you're eating 3 meals a day, spaced about 4 hours apart, you're fine. This is the metabolic ninja. This is the person we all want to be. This guy's got it going on. Pattern 2 is a delayed insulin peak. Again, we got normal fasting glucose, normal fasting insulin, but the insulin peaks a little later. Instead of peaking at 30 minutes, it peaks at 1 hour. But still, by 4 hours, it's back to normal. The glucose is still totally normal the whole time. Pattern 3A, same type of thing. Fasting glucose, fasting insulin are still normal, but the insulin doesn't peak until 2 hours later. So you see the glucose goes up a little bit higher maybe because it's taking the insulin longer to catch up. But still, by 4 hours, everything's back to normal. But you can also see The purple on top is glucose. You see that huge fall between 2 and 3 hours. That's the hypoglycemic person. 3 hours after they eat, that's the person who's ravenous and who's going to the office donut box. When blood sugar, like Megan was saying, hypoglycemia is not defined by any particular blood sugar level. It's defined by symptoms. And I think in a lot of people, hypoglycemia happens regardless of what the actual number is. It's the rate of the plummet. If your blood sugar was high and it drops fast, I think that causes hypoglycemic symptoms in a lot of people. We got the same kind of pattern, but here, insulin doesn't peak until 3 hours. So the blood sugar is skyrocketing. You can see the blood sugar here, at least in the US units, is about 250 because it's taking insulin even longer to catch up, so the glucose has more time to rise. Another pattern, this person's fasting insulin, the blue, is already high. The fasting glucose is high, everything is high. This person is swimming in insulin all day long. This person is probably overweight or obese, but maybe not. They probably are a diagnosed type 2 diabetic. They probably have all kinds of other problems. So the most interesting pattern that Kraft found was pattern 5, insulinopenic, which means low insulin in the blood. You can see the blood sugar is kind of skyrocketing to 300. The insulin is barely moving. It's barely rising. So if you look at the first bullet point, Kraft thought that this was more indicative of like type 1 diabetes, where the insulin is barely moving. What the lab that does this kind of work now says, this is where they also see this pattern in people on a low-carb diet, where your insulin is barely budging, but your glucose is normal. So when you have this insulin pattern, but your glucose is also barely moving, low-carb keto diet. Anyway, gotta move on. I stole this slide from Ted Naiman. You guys probably know he makes the best graphics, so why bother making my own? I didn't steal it. I did give him credit, and I do have permission. So this is just a real quick representation of all those Kraft patterns in one place. The only one here who's normal, who's metabolically healthy, is 1, the green. That's the metabolic ninja. Pattern 5 in the blue is the one we just said, the low insulin. All the rest of those people are hyperinsulinemic. The insulin either peaks later or it's elevated all the time, like in pattern 4. What we call area under the curve, the amount under that curve. You can see pattern 4 is just, like I said yesterday, marinating in insulin all the time. That person probably feels awful physically and mentally all the time. Another Ted Naiman gem, if you look here on the left, this was standard glucose testing. Standard glucose, fasting glucose, oral glucose tolerance test. When you only look at the glucose measurements, 67% of people, about 2/3 of people, are normal. Their glucose is not elevated. Only about 1/3, 33%, have elevated glucose. But if you look on the right, if you look at insulin, when you start looking at insulin, only 20% of the people were normal. 4 out of 5, 80% of the people, when you look at insulin, are hyperinsulinemic. This is why blood sugar is so misleading and limited. So, all right, what the heck is this? What is this weird slide? This is water kind of backing up, getting flooded around the storm drain, right? And the reason the water is backing up and getting flooded is because the storm drain is clogged, right? It's clogged with all these leaves and debris. Now, water is an essential thing, right? We need it to rain. We need rain for the crops, the flowers, water all our lawns, animals need water. So we don't want to have no water. So what's the problem here? Should we pray to the rain gods for less rain, or should we clear away the debris so that the water can drain properly? I know what I would choose. So we're going to look at 2 conditions where they're typically blamed on something else, anything else but chronically high insulin. And there's a method to the madness with the water, you'll see in a minute. Hypertension is almost always blamed on a high sodium diet, right? If you have high blood pressure, you need to cut back on the salt, stop eating all that salty, fatty, greasy food. Except, the reason we're told that is because there's an adage in biochemistry that says water follows sodium. You eat more sodium, the body wants to retain more water in order to balance things out in the blood. And when you retain more water, you have a higher blood volume. When there's more blood traveling through the same number of blood vessels, the pressure's going to go up, right? So, but normally salt is not a problem. We all know, especially on a low-carb diet, salt is an essential nutrient. You will die without sodium. You need sodium. So what's the problem? And most people are not sodium sensitive hypertensives. Most people, when they eat salt, it does nothing to the blood pressure. There's a small subset of people whose blood pressure goes up, but it's very few people. So what's the problem with sodium and blood pressure? Why doesn't a high salt intake normally skyrocket blood pressure? Well, the mechanism that prevents that from happening is that the kidneys excrete excess sodium. No problem. The kidneys are really good at holding on to what the body needs and getting rid of the extra. So what's the problem in hypertension? Why aren't the kidneys doing this? What's preventing the kidneys from getting rid of that sodium? Would it surprise you to know that it's insulin? That's why hypertension is part of the official diagnostic criteria for metabolic syndrome, insulin-resistant syndrome. The vast majority of people who are hypertensive, it has nothing to do with sodium and everything to do with insulin. And the reason they don't know they're hyperinsulinic is because nobody's measuring insulin, and their fasting blood glucose is probably normal. So they're told, oh, Mr. Smith, you're not diabetic, it's fine, just stop eating so much salt. So how are we going to fix this? Well, all we have to do is lower insulin. Insulin is clogging that drain. So sodium is an essential nutrient. Do we want to stop eating sodium? No. We want to unclog the drain. We're going to unclog the kidneys, and what's clogging the kidneys is insulin. Get rid of the insulin, the kidneys are free to excrete that sodium. And we see this on low-carb ketogenic diets all the time. Blood pressure almost always comes down on a low-carb diet. Sometimes it takes longer, like blood sugar can come down within hours to days. Blood pressure sometimes takes weeks or months to reverse. But it's almost like clockwork. Most people who are on hypertensive medication either need a lower dose or can discontinue the medication eventually. We see this all the time, doctors deprescribing hypertensive medication. And one other way that insulin affects blood pressure, it's not just the excretion of the sodium. Insulin stimulates the sympathetic nervous system. You know that fight or flight thing? This is fight or flight, right? You're tensed up, cool, ready to go. If that's what the outside of the body is doing, what do you think your blood vessels are doing? They're constricting, right? Your blood vessels are supposed to be pliant and loose and accommodating, like a rubber garden hose. Supposed to be able to expand and contract. When you have chronically high insulin, and those blood vessels become like hard glass tubes, and now you've got more blood going through them, you've got pressure, of course that blood pressure is going up. So the answer isn't low salt, the answer is low insulin. And just as a real quick aside, if insulin is affecting fluid dynamics and fluid retention because of the kidneys and in the blood, might it also be affecting fluid balance in the inner ears? There's things called cochleovestibular disorders. I had it on the slide earlier. Vertigo, tinnitus, or tinnitus, however you think it's supposed to be said, and Meniere's disease. These are disorders of balance. You get dizzy, you get nauseous, you get ringing in the ears. Dr. Kraft pioneered a lot of work showing a potential connection between hyperinsulinemia and all those weird, they're called idiopathic conditions, and idiopathic means no one knows what causes them. I like to call them idiopathic, because I think we kind of do know what causes them, just nobody's saying so, but no, they're otherwise unexplained, and they're not explained because nobody knows what causes them. The other condition we want to look at with this kidney thing and the drain is gout. And I think there were one or two people here I spoke to that I said you are going to want to come to my talk tomorrow because I'm talking about gout. Here it is. Gout results from the buildup of something called uric acid in the body. And when uric acid accumulates, it can solidify into crystals that get deposited in the joints. And the big toe, I don't know why the big toe is always the most affected or most severely affected. This is always what you see with gout, the big toe. But these crystals can be deposited in other joints too, and it's very painful. And people who have gout are typically told to go on a low-protein diet, low alcohol too, because alcohol interferes with uric acid excretion. So, okay, makes sense. The reason we're typically counseled to do low protein for gout is because this uric acid is a metabolic byproduct of something called purines. Purines are a nitrogen-containing thing, so of course there's going to be more of them in proteins. And it's not just, we're typically cautioned especially against animal protein, especially red meat and seafood and shellfish. But beer is very high in purines. There's plant foods that are high in purines as well, but typically animal food gets the blame. But people have been eating animal protein for zillions of years, but gout is a relatively new disease. Relatively new. There's reports on it hundreds of years ago, but relatively new. And again, just like the sodium, protein is an essential nutrient, right? You can't go on a zero protein diet except when you're fasting, that's fine. When you're actually eating, you do need to consume protein, right? So what's inhibiting the excretion of the uric acid? Why aren't the kidneys excreting the uric acid the way they're supposed to? When you eat protein, you don't get gout. What's the problem when you do get gout? All that uric acid is building up. Well, lo and behold, it's insulin again. Insulin inhibits the excretion of uric acid. So, just as a quick, I don't know if this is inside or just some fun pictures, gout used to be a rich people's disease. If you read Gary Taubes' work, I think he has a very nice explanation of gout, if I remember right, in the case against sugar. They started seeing a lot more gout in the 16 and 1700s. So I said it's a new disease, but that's relatively new. Within human evolution, that's new, right? So, but we've been eating meat, we've been hunting animals forever. What was new in the 16 and 1700s? Sugar. And gout used to be a rich people disease because, yeah, maybe rich people, wealthy people were the only ones who could afford meat, but they were also the only ones at that time who could afford sugar. Sugar used to be really expensive. The refined people ate the refined sugar, the refined grains, because they were refined people. So here we have typical depictions of gout from old books. It's always depicted as a demon, like eating your feet, attacking the toes, shooting flame at your toes. And here we have a picture of a man that looks to be some kind of aristocrat, some kind of wealthy man. He's drinking alcohol. He has what appears to be a meatball on a fork there, and he's got gout. But again, we don't want to lower protein. Protein is an essential thing to consume. What we need to do is lower the insulin. And a lot of people are recommended to go on a vegetarian diet for gout, right? Because you're automatically going to lower your consumption of animal protein, even if you do lacto-ovo. If you're not eating red meat, not eating shellfish, all that. I have vegetarian friends who have raging gout because they're addicted to fructose. Fructose is a major trigger for gout also, even though fructose does actually not affect insulin the way glucose does. But because of the way fructose affects the liver, it does affect insulin sensitivity over the long term. Dr. Fung has articles about this, it's awesome. In the acute sense, fructose doesn't jack up insulin, but over time, because of how it messes with the liver, it affects all of this. So, what do we want to do for gout? Typically advised to do a low protein diet. Well, here's a study that they did on a higher protein diet for gout, but it was lower in carbs. Now, it was also, you can see, increased proportional intake of protein and unsaturated fat. So to be clear, it was also slightly calorie restricted, and they went lower on saturated fat, higher on mono and poly, unsaturated fat. Even so, look what happened. Holy freaking moly. On the left, we have the uric acid, kind of comes down pretty nicely. On the right, you can see the attacks per month, the gout attacks. They drop like a stone. Those gout attacks, some of those people didn't have any more attacks at all. You can see they're on the zero line. And the other people, I don't know what was up with that one. I don't remember if that was an outlier who didn't change at all, but most of those people had a significant decrease in gout attack. And if you look, this diet was still 40% carbs. This isn't even a low-carb diet, and it's sure not a ketogenic diet, but it's lower than the standard American diet could easily be, 50 or 60% carbs, probably in Canada too. So 40% is lower, and it's a 30% protein, which is much higher than anyone would ever recommend conventionally for gout. So, even with 40% carbohydrate, they still had this massive reduction in gout attacks. Imagine if this was really a low-carb diet, what would happen? So here's some of the data. You can see it was a 16-week study. If you look at the top of the weight, they lost 7.7 kilos. For all you Americans, that's about 17 pounds in a 16-week study. And one of the low-carb docs I know says about a pound or two a week is a good rate of loss. So this is a great rate of loss. It's about a pound a week. Everything comes down. Weight comes down, BMI comes down, gout attacks down, uric acid down, cholesterol down, triglycerides drop by more than half. The only thing that goes up is the one thing we want to have go up, which is the HDL. That went up. The reason there's a negative is because you see the column is a decrease, so a negative decrease is actually an increase. This was a higher protein diet for gout, and what this tells us is that you can actually improve gout by eating more protein, provided that you cut the carbs. So this is why Gerald Reaven, who is the father of Syndrome X, he coined the term Syndrome X. This is why Dr. Reaven called the kidney an unwilling accomplice in Syndrome X. And look, he only did it in 1997 in the American Journal of Kidney Disease. Sorry it took us 21 years to catch up, Dr. Regan. So, all right, how are we going to improve insulin sensitivity? Most of you probably already know most of these things, but obviously, we can do a low-carb keto diet. You saw that slide where the insulin was so much lower when you eat low-carb keto. However, the beauty, in my opinion, of the ketogenic or low-carb diet is that you don't really have to worry about insulin sensitivity. If you're not eating foods that jack up your insulin all the time, who cares how sensitive you are to insulin? If you're not marinating insulin all the time, you're not jacking it up 7 times a day, you don't have to be that sensitive to it. Fasting, obviously. Same thing. If you're not eating anything, you're not going to jack up your insulin. You don't really have to be sensitive to insulin if you ain't jacking it up. Exercise. So exercise is starting to get a bad rap in the low-carb world. The exercise doesn't help you lose weight. Well, yeah, thanks. I know that. Because I've done it for like 20 years and it never got me anywhere. So I'm pretty sure that exercise is useless for fat loss. However, it doesn't mean it's not good for you. Doesn't mean it doesn't help other things. It doesn't mean it doesn't help cardiorespiratory fitness. I do it for mental health more than anything. It makes me feel better. And it is good for insulin sensitivity and carbohydrate handling in that when you exercise, your muscles do what we call non-insulin mediated glucose disposal. Meaning, you don't even need insulin to get glucose into your muscles after you exercise. Insulin can help, but you don't need it. Exercise makes your muscle cells like little sponges for glucose. So, that's great, except if you're not eating glucose all the time and your blood isn't awash in glucose all the time, you don't have to worry about disposing of it in the muscles, right? If you're not constantly flooding your system with glucose, you don't need to give it somewhere to go. And you can absolutely lose weight. You can absolutely reverse metabolic disease without exercise because some of the low-carb physicians we know have patients in wheelchairs. These people can't exercise and they do great on keto. They do great on low-carb. They can't exercise even if they wanted to. So the other thing that can help insulin handling, insulin sensitivity is sleep. Better sleep quality and quantity. So we all know that box of donuts at the office calls your name much more loudly and much more temptingly when you only have like 3 or 4 hours of sleep, right? And that stuff looks so much better than it normally does. However, even if you don't give in, even if you resist and you just eat your normal low-carb food, lack of sleep or broken sleep, interrupted sleep, messes with hormones and appetite and satiety, and it messes with handling. It messes with insulin sensitivity, it messes with cortisol levels. All these other hormones are affected by sleep. So, lack of sleep, broken sleep makes you crave this stuff more, but even if you don't eat it, you still handle food differently. This talk is long, I knew this was going to go long, I'm going to have to remove some slides, but moving on, we do need to clear some stuff up, because despite everything I've just said, insulin is not always a bad thing. If you don't think insulin is a life-saving, necessary, essential hormone, talk to a type 1 diabetic. We need insulin. We don't want insulin to be 0. Insulin is not a bad thing. High insulin all the time is a bad thing, right? So if you look at these 2 scenarios, one scenario here, they've just been through a drought. One scenario, they're flooded from a hurricane. If you ask both of these people in each of these situations, how do you feel about some water right about now? Would you like some rain? You're going to get very different answers from these people. And it's not that there's nothing wrong with water, there's nothing wrong with rain, it's a very different situation. So same thing with insulin, it's all about context. I'm tired of people being afraid of spiking insulin and insulin, blah, blah, blah. We do need some insulin, it's okay. So the reason we have to talk about this is because everyone is so terrified of protein, right? I said we're going to get back to protein. The reason everybody's scared of protein is because protein turns into sugar, protein spikes your insulin, or protein kicks you out of ketosis. No. So this protein, everybody's so, because they're afraid of protein, instead of, when they're hungry, instead of having 2 or 3 hard-boiled eggs, they'll have a fat bomb. Or instead of having a second helping of chicken or pork, they'll put 3 tablespoons of oil in their coffee. So we're so afraid of protein, and we're gorging on fat, and I see this in clients all the time. It hinders fat loss, it hinders progress. This protein fear-mongering, this like, I'm being so scared, is entirely new, and it's entirely unnecessary. Let's talk about what protein does to insulin. Protein doesn't spike insulin. Protein elicits a normal, physiologically acceptable, to be expected rise in insulin. A normal, healthy insulin effect, not a spike, right? The same thing of like broccoli is a carbohydrate. Broccoli doesn't spike glucose. You know, this word spike is like, it's like nails on a chalkboard to me now, because everybody's so terrified of protein. Anyways, the point is, we do need some insulin. It's all about context. Eating protein is not going to raise your insulin. It's not going to keep you in that awash in insulin state. That's refined carbohydrate. Multiple feedings of carbohydrate all throughout the day. Like Dr. Ben Bidman said, and Dr. Bishop had this on the slide the other day, Dr. Bidman says, prioritize protein, control carbs filled with fat. And if you look at the original Atkins diet induction, arguably one of the most effective ways to start a low-carb diet or to get into ketosis except for fasting. The original Atkins induction, and if you guys know Dr. Eric Westman, the famous Westman page 4, you know what's unlimited on those programs? Protein. You know what is limited on Westman page 4? Fat. Fat is not unlimited on the famous Westman diet. I think, if I remember right, in the Atkins induction, I don't think he has a limit on fat, but I do know that protein is not unlimited. Protein is not limited because they're not worried about an insulin spike from the protein. If you keep carbs really low, the effect of protein on insulin is very different than the effect of increased protein in the context of high carb. I've gone way over. This talk is supposed to be like 15 minutes less. I'm going to have to figure that out this week. Thank you for listening, and thank you for coming.